Hello, class, and welcome to Chapter 8, Reconstruction, the Making and the Unmaking of a Revolution, History 334, African American History after 1865 until present day. So, the textbook that you should be using is Freedom on My Mind, A History of African Americans with Documents, second edition, but also volume 2. This book is interesting. This textbook is interesting, just like this class, as I stated before in my introduction, because it is one of my favorite topics, but also this book breaks down African American history in a very good chronological way, and so it will be easy for you to follow. Chapter 8, as it says, begins in 1865 through 1885. This will be a brief overview. I still expect you to read the chapter along with the lecture notes. The lecture PowerPoint that I uploaded also has notes on it. And again, I will be pulling my test questions and midterm questions from the lecture notes and the book. So just to give you an overview of what this chapter discusses briefly, in about 10 to 15 minutes, because I know you all can't listen to me that long, right? I think I have a radio voice, but I'm not too sure, and I just, don't want to test it. This chapter discusses what happens after the Civil War, okay? And not to be biased, I studied the Civil War, but it is quite possibly one of the most important events in African American history of all time, right? It's an event that determines our future well into today, right? People are still discussing what happened during the Civil War. Who won it is clear who won it, but people are still kind of confused about it. The memory of the Civil War, how people memorialize it, both in monuments and museums, is still being discussed today. And it is because the Civil War not only determined the path of African Americans, but it also determined the path of the United States. Had we lost the Civil War, we would not be talking about the United States. We would be talking about the Confederate States of America and the Union, right? And the Northern States of America, whatever name they would choose to pick after they were defeated. It is kind of one of the first testing fields for what this country will be, and we will continue that fight well into the 20th and today. What this country will be, what democracy is, what freedom is, and should freedom be for everyone. But more importantly, for African American history, the Civil War ends chattel slavery in the United States, right? The book starts in 1865, just to kind of catch you up to speed on history. The Civil War is fought between 1861 and 1865. If you don't know what the Civil War is, I would tell you it is a crazy time. The Southern states seceded from the Union, which means they left the Union and decided to form their own country. I should point out their country had their own president, a different form of Congress, a different Senate, different political representation. Their president was Jefferson Davis. The Union's president was Abraham Lincoln. We went to war for 4 years, and we went to war because they wanted to preserve the Union. And that's important to remember, because as we get into the Civil War, we will get tons of reasons why Abraham Lincoln fought the Civil War, why the Union stands today. But initially, it was to preserve the Union, to make sure that Abraham Lincoln, once he's elected in 1861, says, listen, here's the deal. For as long as I'm president, I should fight this fight, because no state should be allowed to secede from the Union and form their own country. Like, that is insane. We fought the American Revolution. As 13 colonies, we grew into this vast country, and now we have southern states who want to succeed. Now, the reasons why the southern states want to succeed are still being argued about today. I will be biased in this, because it's very important that we get this straight, so we never have to discuss it. Well, we don't have to continue to discuss it after I am long gone. I hope history books are clear about this, and people are clear about this everywhere, right? The southern states left the Union, seceded from the Union because of slavery. And not So the southern states wanted to hold slaves. And when I say southern states, I'll probably include a map of the Confederate States of America. But they wanted to hold slaves, but they also wanted to make sure that slavery could expand into Western territory. That is very important because the Union, the northern states, are hoping to stop the spread of slavery. They are not there. There's tons of misconceptions about what the Union fought for and what Abraham Lincoln stood for and all these other things. But the Union initially is trying to stop the expansion of slavery. As we are moving into the West, and I mean California, Arizona, all of those states, there is a big debate in those states. Should slavery exist, right? We know that slavery exists in southern states, and we know that slavery does not or has been abolished in many northern states at this time. And so as we move west, what should happen to those new states we bring in, right? If we make a place like California a southern state, or Kansas and Nebraska a southern state, or I'm sorry, a slavery state, then what happens then? And I know if I was in class, I would say, what happens with that class? And you all will respond, it would mess up the representation in Congress. As slavery expands, slave states gain more representation in Congress, therefore holding more power. And so Confederate states decide to leave the Union after northern states threatened to stop the expansion of slavery. I'm going to say that again. Confederate states decide to leave the Union after northern states tried to stop the expansion of slavery. Notice I did not mention abolishing slavery at all. Northern states were not interested in abolishing slavery. In fact, in Abraham Lincoln's initial inauguration speech, he says, where slavery exists, with the places that it does exist, I will leave it alone there. It's not that I'm not interested in abolishing slavery. I'm interested in stopping the expansion of slavery. Another misconception is that while Abraham Lincoln wants to stop the spread of slavery, right? This is not a moral issue yet. We are not talking about that Abraham Lincoln cries at night about slavery, right? Perhaps he does, but I'm not sure that I'm not really sure about that. What we do know, though, is that although it's not a moral issue, Abraham Lincoln believes that slavery hinders the right of free men, free white men, in their labor prospects, because in places like California, where free white men would like to move and work, they're unable to do that if slavery exists in the economy. Got that? So this is not a moral issue yet, not at least for many Union politicians. It becomes a moral issue much later on. And so we fight the Civil War. The Union wins. Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. I could go on and on about the Civil War because I love it, but I'll just sum that up for you. I gave you that political standpoint because after the Civil War is fought and the Union wins, the Union now controls the future of newly freed African Americans. As you know, the slavery is abolished in 1865 with the 13th Amendment. It is no more a labor system, or should no longer be a labor system in the United States. And so here we are, this country that has fought a war that separated us almost, but we have these newly freed African Americans, people who had been slaves for generations, right? Who had lived in bondage, under bondage for generations. And now that they are free, what will happen? What sort of political systems do African Americans want? Even though they've been talking about that for years, what sort of cultural systems do they want to build? What do they want, right? African Americans are very clear about what they want, as they have been throughout United States history, and this is what this chapter discusses. Perhaps one of the most important things that happens, and you'll see a digital history website about this, is the reuniting families. Slavery tore apart generations of families. And so after the Civil War, African Americans are interested in finding, not only interested, they search vigorously for their lost family members, right? So freedom and family are connected. They would like to get married. They legalize marriages. After citizenship comes marriage, and they start to choose new names and flexible family units. Another thing that African Americans are interested in after the Civil War and is building social institutions or cultural institutions. So you see the creations of churches, right? You see and what the Black church means. You also see African Americans push to own their own land and have economic power. And perhaps the most important thing is you see African Americans push for an education for their families and their children and themselves in many cases. So you will see the creation of tons of historically Black colleges and universities during this time. Fisk University, Hampton Institute, Howard University comes about. This era between 1865 and I'm going back just so you know, 1865 and 1885, well, 1865 and 1872 is known as, 1877 is known as Reconstruction because the country is working to be reconstructed. I just told you about the things that African Americans wanted, but those are all things happening on the ground, and African Americans are, calling for what they want. But politically, the country is still at odds. We have Southern politicians who are still in the Senate, or Southern, if not Southern politicians who are in Congress and are being represented. There are Southern kind of, what is the word that I'm looking for? That I'm trying to be politically correct. There are people who believe that the Southern states should be forgiven, right? And so the political contest over Reconstruction is between people who support the Union and people who support forgiving the South, right? And bringing them back into the Union successfully. That is something to remember because Americans do not believe that we can hold a grudge against Southern states for very long. And so because of that, there is a lengthy political fight that ends with a president being almost impeached or being impeached, but not actually leaving. Johnson's impeachment, Andrew Johnson. We end up with a powerful Reconstruction Act that protects the African American vote. Another fallacy that we always hear is that African Americans did not have the right to vote in the 19th century. They did not receive it until 1965. That is not true. During the Reconstruction era, African Americans did vote, and during that time, they put African Americans in federal office, some highest positions in the state office. We had our first Black senator during that time, our first Black lieutenant governor in Louisiana. And so African Americans are voting during the Reconstruction period because their vote is protected. This is a great map that shows the former Confederate states and how the government went about protecting the African American vote in these states. They ended up separating Southern states into military districts and taking over and placing Union troops there to protect the African American vote after the war, right? This is after the Civil War. We are still using military troops to make sure that Confederate soldiers and former Confederates act right. These are the first colored senators and representatives. You may be familiar with some of them. I know that I am. For instance, Blanche K. Bruce is in here somewhere. Blanche K. Bruce is Frederick Douglass's best friend. Hiram Relves is in here. A bunch of great people are in here that represent some of the first free African Americans in the political system. Now, as always, when you have African Americans who get power, this is a trend in American history, you will have a sort of counter-revolution. And that it happens during Reconstruction. As African Americans gain voting rights and all of these powers, I guess is the word, or rights, their Democratic Party comes back and supports the restoration of white supremacy in the South.